Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. I think we got some requests to record as well. Oh, it looks like we started. Appreciate you guys having us here on Friday. My name is Corey Rutherford. I'm the Sumerian Principal Advisory Engineer. I've been with the company for about 5 years. I think probably most interesting is I come from an education background, so I spent 17 years in the education within the area of higher education primarily. So I understand the challenges quite well and can empathize with everybody in the room and on the call. Something of interest is that during my time in higher education, I did use Sumerian for about 10 of those years, and Sumerian was very crucial to us protecting our data essentially throughout the universities that I managed. It really helped us with the management and governance of the different processes that were required as well. So I'm looking forward to talking to that today during our discussion. And with that, Kevin, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yes, good morning. As Mr. Malloy said, my name is Kevin Coppins. We did have the opportunity to work together back in the Maroon Networks days. I did spend a lot of time in K through 12. I've been with Sumerian now for 3 years. Background is in technology for the last 25 or so. So I know we've got a condensed time. I'm going to echo it's end of school year. So our goal today isn't to answer every question that you might have. We're probably going to build more curiosity than answer every question, but Kevin and my team is standing by to go ahead and follow up as needed. So we're going to move pretty quickly, but we will keep an eye out for questions on the chat and make sure we follow up accordingly. First, I'm going to cover a couple areas around the challenges that you guys see every single day. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because you guys already know it. I did pull some interesting data, though, from a source here in the US that tracks this on an annual basis. Everything that we discussed today, if you want the source material, we're happy to send that along as well. We're going to just spend, I think, about 5 to 10 minutes, if that, on zero trust. As a framework, you can have zero trust, you can have NIST, you can have ISO. There's a variety of them. Zero trust seems to be the hot button these days, so we're just going to talk a little bit about where that starts. Then Corey's going to take us into any one of these compliance frameworks. It really starts with understanding what sensitive data is and making sure you identify that as step one. So as, again, Mr. Malloy brought up at the beginning, we will then start drilling into what is discovery, what is classification, what does that mean at scale for an enterprise and for students. And then we'll bring up a couple of places where we've been doing this. As Corey mentioned at the beginning, we're not a startup. We've been at this for over 15 years, and we did start off in the education space. So we still have hundreds of clients that are waking up every single day, figuring out how do they protect students, faculty, staff, parents, and their communities, and starting with sensitive data. So go ahead and go to the next slide there, Corey. So K-12 Information Security Exchange is a U.S. public association that studies what's going on in K through 12 from a cyber standpoint. What's interesting about this chart isn't going into all the detail. And again, if anybody wants the core report, I think it's about 15 to 16 pages. It's super fascinating, bringing up examples. But the heart of what's is being the data breach. That's fully 67% of the entire chart. Go ahead to the next slide. And use them interchangeably. So I like to define them. Ransomware is basically a form of malware designed to encrypt files so that it renders the files and systems unusable. It locks it down. It can lock down a file or it can lock down a system. You guys have all read about ransomware and some of you have probably experienced it. On the other side is a data breach. Data breaches is when somebody gets to the sensitive data that they shouldn't have access to and uses it in a way they shouldn't. Exfiltrates it, goes ahead and takes it out. Common breach exposures, we talk about PII, personal information, PHI, banking information. What's been happening more recently, and go to the next slide, Corey, is those two things are combining. So you have a combination of ransomware and a data breach. And I picked up Broward County ISD here in South Florida. I'm based in Tampa. For those that visit, stop in and say hi. That's where the company's headquartered. And I love this. This is actually a screenshot from a chat from the ransomware perpetrator saying, the bad news is we hacked your network and encrypted all your servers and downloaded more than 1 terabyte of personal data, including financial contracts databases. So now they've locked everything down, but before they did that, they took all the sensitive bits out. So they're ransoming not only access back to their systems, but also saying, oh, by the way, if you give us $40 million, what we'll do is we won't go ahead and release all that stuff we sold, we promise. So it's a combination of ransomware and data breach in this particular case, but I think everybody just throws out ransomware and doesn't look at the two components of it. So understanding what data was truly exfiltrated is going to determine how serious that incident is. And why is K through 12 a prime target? You guys have limited resources. It's well known that primary and secondary education are behind. You guys have not been spending money on this for 10, 20 years, as opposed to maybe financial services, and are considered a soft target. The data that you're entrusted with is incredibly important. So not just the highly sensitive data of students and teachers and faculty currently, all the stuff you have historically, but also mission critical data that drives funding, network access. And then the last, but absolutely not the least, is schools are a cornerstone of society. If a school gets locked down or a school gets impacted, it impacts the entire community. It hits every news wire. Everybody's having a conversation. How are you protecting my kids? Because the digital version of ourselves is as valuable as the physical version in many cases, and can be sold time and time and time again. So how are we protecting kids? If you're interested, this is actually a passion of mine. There was a great segment done on the news around kids who had their information stolen when they were in kindergarten, when they were in first grade, second grade, third grade, and didn't even realize it until they went to apply for their first credit card or their first car loan, and realized that they were already had a massively negative credit score because somebody had been using that for years. Texas example, and these all came out of the one report that I referenced earlier. In responding to a 2021 ransomware attack, they paid $550,000. And I thought the comment from the district was interesting. These funds would have rather been spent on the needs of our employees, students, and families, invested back into education, but there was no other choice for the district to ensure the safety as their number one priority. So they did go ahead and pay. Most of the law, the legal world, from the FBI to the CIA to local police departments, they never, ever, ever pay. But when you're sitting there saying, I can't teach, I can't bring students here, and they're holding all of that data hostage, sometimes it's a very difficult decision for boards to make. All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask the question, and then Corey's going to answer it a little bit later. So upon discovering and disclosing that you have an incident, the first question that you will be asked by your executive team is, how bad is it? How much did they get? What was actually impacted? What shut down? What does this mean? What does the word ransomware and data breach mean? And you're going to go back to those definitions that I showed you 3 slides ago. And then you're going to have to say, how much student information do they have? Do they have employee information? Do they have passwords? Do they have access to the systems? How bad is it is the first question that you're going to go ahead and ask. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on Zero Trust. For those not familiar with Zero Trust, it actually dates back, I think, to 2010, 2011. John Kindervag was at Forrester Research Group at the time, and he basically said, look, we have to stop this idea that you can trust certain people and not certain people. We're just going to trust nobody. We're going to trust no systems. We're going to trust nothing, and we're going to start with Zero Trust and build from there. And he built a framework that's got 5 pillars that Corey's going to take you through. I only put the fact that Biden put out an executive order here in the US back in May of last year, where he basically said, look, I'm expecting every single agency to have a Zero Trust architecture and framework in place. And you're starting to see that same sort of mandate move around the world. There was actually, Kindervag was interviewed at RSA this past week, and he talked about, he's now going all over the world talking about Zero Trust with governments. And there's been some conversation, I think just recently, there was an article in the Toronto Star talking about Zero Trust in Canada and how Canada should adopt it. So we're using that as one framework to talk about a framework, but not necessarily promote Zero Trust. But again, if you pick any single one of them, they typically start with data. So Corey, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so Zero Trust has been fundamentally one approach to hardening our environments and making sure that our data is secure. So far, most organizations have focused on the user trust. So the different pillars of Zero Trust, so the user trust, the device trust, protecting the devices themselves, hardening the network, making sure only applications that are running within the environment are approved, and so forth. One place that hasn't really been dealt with well yet is going to be the side of the data itself. So the data centricity of the data. What types of data actually exist where in the environment, so you know how to better protect those types of environments. So we took a snapshot from the Cyber Infrastructure Security Administration. It's basically, think of it like a framework, how to best use Zero Trust to harden your environment. And this is from the data pillar specifically. And you can see this is a pretty large chart. It's very comprehensive. But the main thing to take away from this chart is that there are a number of processes around how to better manage your data. But more importantly, there's a maturity to this process. You've got your everyday traditional processes where we just say, okay, we're thinking about protecting our data by using, firewalls, next-gen firewalls or CASBs or something like that. But really what we need to do is we need to start to mature those processes through this advanced and this optimal stage, which basically says, hey, we've taken the time, we invested in the right tools to manage our data in the right way. And that is part of the maturity for Zero Trust. And it's a data-centric approach to that. So the idea is you have to understand what you're trying to protect, right? Are you trying to protect your jewels, your diamonds, or are you trying to protect your trash? So if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it, right? You can't make decisions around how you protect that information, your student information, your faculty, staff, your affiliates, and so forth. So before investing in just any security tool, you really have to identify what it is you truly need. Do I need a DLP first, or do I need a data discovery tool first to accurately find that data? So then all those systems downstream can more readily provide the protection that I need for the functions I'm trying to get out of my program, my security program. So it boils down to Zero Trust, the data-centric approach. So again, we're going to say this a lot, protect what matters most. So if it's done right, you can automate an approach involving 3 different ongoing processes. And this is core to any type of good data management. And you've probably heard of the NIST standards. They're pretty much universally accepted. It's not just a US standard, but internationally. The first component of that is data discovery. So being able to find the data. You need to be able to scan for sensitive data so you can make decisions around the types of data where they're discovered and so forth. And those could be data elements such as PII, so your personally identifiable information, your addresses, your date of births, things like that you consider sensitive. This could also be electronic health information. So think about your students' records and things like that. Student IDs, being able to find the student IDs as they relate to other information in your environment, driver's license and so forth. One important component to that is in order to do that, you have to be able to connect to all of the different types of data repositories that exist out there, right? Your file servers, your database servers, your Office 365, your G Drives, G Suites, things like that, in order to do that data discovery component. And then the maturity of that is the data classification, the data tagging. So it's the actual applying of these labels and metadata, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then lastly, once your process becomes more mature, it's the data protection and reporting, protecting the data through different remediation actions, such as deletion. If the data is old, you don't need to retain it anymore per the compliance requirements, data retention requirements. It makes sense to maybe get rid of it, back it up, and then delete it from the main system. If you reduce the amount of data, sensitive data in your organization, the footprint of risk is reduced as well. And you can use various techniques to do that. So again, Zero Trust, the data-centric approach, is really based off of verifying and understanding the exact data on those different devices that you're storing, right? You don't want to forget about endpoints. This is something that a lot of people forget about. So these are your Windows devices and such. So a lot of the data that gets created and used is typically being used on those laptops you have on those desktops with you right now, right? We copy data to it, we create data there, we put it to the file server. But we always typically keep a copy there. That could be a treasure trove for a ransomware attack, right? So if you understand what are on those devices when something like that happens, you can more readily react to those favorably. And this is also true I know school organizations use like notebooks or Chromebooks quite frequently. So Chromebooks connect to G Suite, right? So we have connectors that connect directly to that so we can scan those repositories to make sure that we're protecting the data efficiently. The idea is protect data based on what's actually stored there, not what's expected to be stored on those types of devices. So again, coming back to protecting what matters most. So it all starts with complying, right? You have a regulation, you have a data hygiene project you're working, you just want to be better at what you do within the organization. So in order to comply, you have to be able to control that data better. To control that data, you have to understand what it is you're tackling, right? And then if you can understand what you're basically tackling, then you can better classify the information so that you can better provide the tagging to basically say this is restricted data versus this is public data. So better understanding the importance of the data. And to do that, you have to discover the data. So that the idea is that to automatically and persistently discover, classify, understand, control, and protect the sensitive data while employees have access to the information they need, right? So it's the whole idea of this data lifecycle, this one-on-one management process, which is an ongoing continual process. So it all starts with discovering the data, right? So you have to be able to identify the student data in this particular use case, and that starts with discovery. So Spirion has, over the past 15 years, like Kevin alluded to, we've been around for 15 years, so we've got a proven technology that we've been using, and it's been very successful in the education sector. We have a set of custom, we call them Anyfind definitions. They're like sensitive data definitions. They are, think of it like a mathematical process. It's not necessarily machine learning, but it is a model that has been created to look for sensitive data. And the thing that's great about our process is that you don't have to feed this machine learning process to say this is what an address looks like and so forth. These are definitions that have been created over the past 15 years. These are out of the box, ready to scan. You don't have to train a model. This model has already been built. So this is why we have such a high accuracy, 98+% accuracy when we're looking for these different types of data. And that's important, right? If you only have a 60 or 70% confidence you're finding a student ID, you're less prone to take reaction on that. If you have a 98+% accuracy, you're more likely to say, okay, I trust what's happening here. Let's go ahead and take some type of automated approach or action on it. Let's classify this information, or let's go ahead and shred it because we're finding it on laptops or an email where it doesn't belong. So the idea is focus on the data at rest, right? So by doing that, we can reduce the false positives that are typically generated by like your DLP processes and various other types of in motion processes. And the whole idea is to accurately search for that and apply those different types of enhancements. So personal data, it's almost everywhere, right? I love this. There's this general rule. We have an individual here who works at Smerian, and he's on the legal side of things. And he basically, his thing is if it's powered by electricity, it probably produces personal information. I can't agree with that more. So anytime that you're storing information, we're finding it. So we're able to look for different types of personal information, and more specifically, like in education systems, so like your Google, your G Suite, your Classroom, Office 365 or Brightspace and so forth. And what we're doing is we're connecting to all these different data repositories and looking for information like you see here. So electronic health information, we're looking for student information systems type information, student ID, telephone, personal address, date of birth, grades, things like that. And we're not just looking for those elements individually, we're actually looking for them in combination to others. That's what is the real important data. So let's say we're looking for a student ID, but we want to make sure that student ID also has some information around it that's valuable, such as telephone number, personal address, date of birth. Those are the things that if an incident were to occur, those are the types of information that would be important to protect or to understand the scope of an incident and so forth. So this is how we look for data. We look for data based on the context, the proximity of what's around that information and so forth. And by doing that, we look for any file that's out there. So we're not limited to just, let's say, the Office 365 files, right? We're extending way beyond that. We're scanning any type of file that exists on a file server or on a laptop or Red Hat or on a Mac device and so forth. So that's one of the powers of Smerian, is being able to basically discover and go through the context, actually read the information within any type of file that exists out in your environment, structured or unstructured. Again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, it's important to be able to search everywhere. If you can only search a percentage of your environment, you're really not providing the best scope of protection in your environment. So it's important to have a technology tool set that can scan a large number of the systems that you're using, right? And also being able to integrate with other systems that can also stop that as well. So we kind of view our technology as the single lens to all data. We can connect to, we can scan, we can provide all the different results as a result of a scan for personal and sensitive data in the organization. So what basically comes from that is effective data classification. Classification is a way, again, to basically show the sensitivity or the criticality of data. And the role of data classification is basically a process of analyzing the data and applying labels to them, right? That indicates the sensitivity of the file or maybe the types of regulation that those documents fall under. So if you got information that falls under, MIFPA or maybe the Education Act of Ontario, or maybe you have data that, happens to fall under GDPR and so forth, because you got international types of data being shared, we can do that. We understand what that data looks like, and we can apply those labels. It helps with the different processes around regulation, policy implementation, the expectations of those policies, operations, right? And the controls that you apply. So if another system says, hey, this has the tag of GDPR, well, that data should be dealt with in a different way at motion, right? And maybe a firewall rejects that data from leaving the country because it only should stay within that country of origin. It also helps you understand how it should be protected. Again, regulated types of data, how long it should be retained. Almost all data has a retention requirement for that. So what we can do is we can say, hey, this data is 10 years old, or this data is 15 years old, or this data hasn't been used or modified or touched, in 5 years. So you start to make decisions around, should we just back that up one final last time and then let's delete it from the network again, reduce that footprint of risk. And then how should it be disposed of, right? There's different processes to that. Should we just delete it? Should we back it up first? Should we quarantine it to kind of an archive enclave location and let that sit there for a year before we commit to these types of processes? So this is something that Spirion does. And one of the things I want to point out is to the right, this is probably a familiar image to you, taking regulation, taking classification, and applying the different types of data to a classification. This is how Spirion works. We say, hey, if you've got social number, password number, we classify it as critical, or whatever your classification, taxonomy is. But we have the ability to group the sensitive data into these buckets of trust, essentially. Also true for regulation. It's the same idea. So one of the important takeaways from classification here is that we persistently classify. What that means is that when we find a file that has a particular type of information in it, and this will be different for every organization, school system, so forth. Once we find that, we tag that file. And you can see an example here in this Excel file. You can see we've got different things in here. We've tagged it as machine readable data because it maybe has some type of machine readable passport information in it, or PIPEDA for another regulation, and so forth. So not only do we do that at the user level where you can expose that, and obviously that can be turned on and off if you like, but more importantly, that black screen, that command prompt there, we actually tag the metadata itself. So anywhere that data moves within your organization, that tag is part of that file now. So if you have other systems that are saying, hey, I want to make sure that this data exfiltration process doesn't occur, then those SOAR-like type systems, or there's next-gen firewalls, or there's SD-WANs, they can pick up that and say, okay, hey, look, this has got this classification. This isn't allowed to do this now. And it can do it accurately, because guess what? We've already taken the time to actually go through and very accurately discover the types of data that exist there. So why data classification? So kind of going back to my earlier statement, it really helps you understand what you really have in your organization, where is it, and then how to control it, and the retainment requirements for that. It helps with you prioritizing controls according to the regulations that data falls under. And also it helps in the event of a breach or some type of incident, just in general, help you prioritize the efforts to understand the scope of that data. So again, if you have a laptop that is stolen, lost, it walks away, it's been compromised by malware or ransomware or something like that. If you understand the types of data that were on there, you understand how to deal with that particular scenario much better than you would have otherwise, right? This also can help with your improving your stance when it comes to business continuity planning and disaster recovery. So if you have a file server that's been ransomware, and then suddenly you have 3 others that have been ransomware, which one do you start with recovering first, right? Well, it's the one that probably has the most sensitive data on it, because that's the one that's probably being used. So you can start to understand the value of the services, the applications as well, based off of the types of data that is stored on there, file servers, database servers, whatever they happen to be. So going back to the question earlier, effective data classification answers, the question. So Kevin, going back to, you tell us, when we're seeing all this, tell us, how bad is it really?
Effective data classification answers the question. And Corey is actually talking to one of your former peers at Penn State University. And every single time they have an incident, it goes to the Spirion desk before it gets passed on to compliance and the privacy team, because they can identify the order of magnitude of the severity. Let's go to the next slide. I can't stand Kevin Hart looking at me this long. It freaks me out a little bit. I hadn't had enough coffee to stare at Kevin Hart. So the last 3 circles that Corey teed us up for are understand, control, and comply, right? And a lot of times we start back with the circle the other way. If you wanted to be compliant with something, what did you have to do before you were compliant? Whether it be an internal policy or an external regulation, I had to have control of that data. How do I get control of that data? I had to understand it. So when you put this discovery and classification together, we try to simplify it so that you guys can leave here and explain this to other people in your administrations. We look at the value of the data, the volume of the data, and the vulnerability of the data. We call that SDV3, a very simple risk chart that everybody's familiar with. If I have high value data, let's go ahead and pick a student ID number. And let's say I've got 74,000 of those in a spreadsheet. I have high value, and high volume. And now let's say I've got 15 copies of that spreadsheet because it's loaded from my laptop up to the cloud. Then it's been replicated in an email because I sent it to somebody else. High value and high volume. So that's going to push me towards the major or extreme side. But now it's sitting on a laptop, very vulnerable. It's sitting in an air-gapped server on the side of a mountain, probably not as vulnerable. So understanding a combination of those three vectors, what is the value? And the value is determined by you as an organization. Yes, there's some external metrics you can use. You can rate it on a 1 to 5, or you can do it from a monetary standpoint. We have organizations that do both. Volume, how much do I have? And then how vulnerable is it? And then you wake up every morning and you work on getting the red out, like the old Visine commercials. How do I get the red out to make sure I'm reducing my overall risk profile? And I don't want to say the interesting thing, one of the things about understanding data, you can truly go back and say, we found 1 million pieces of data where it should not be, and it is no longer there. You are definitively reducing risk versus I put up another firewall or another intrusion prevention detection system, which isn't as tangible, still impactful. But when you can sit there and say, look, we have went and searched every single teacher's laptop and we have pulled off 7.4 million records that were related to students that are now no longer sitting at the vulnerable edge, but they've either been deleted, shredded, or quarantined, I can absolutely say that I've improved our overall security posture. Next slide, Corey. And we do that, sticking back with the technology. There's a visual chart off to the right. You can just go ahead and build it, Corey, it's fine. That's how we visualize the process of go find a thing in these locations. So in this case, it's looking for social security numbers. Go find a thing. Now, once you've found a thing based on where you found it, I want you to classify it. Apply this data, like Corey was talking about. Apply this metadata to the files. It's the physical equivalent is I just went through this giant stack of manila folders, and every time I read what's in it, I put a sticky note on top saying, here's what's in this file. But it's digital, so now other things can read it. And based on that, saying, all right, here's this giant stack of files I went through. These top 5 are going to get put over here because this has all of our financial information. I'm going to stack that over here. This has all of our student information. So you can segregate that stuff. Go back a slide quick, Corey. So you can segregate that stuff, and now the rest of your systems know what to do with it. So I can go ahead and take each one of those 3 vectors. I can take the value of the data. So let's say it was, again, student IDs, and I can redact them. I can put little X's in that spreadsheet that were there. Now I've taken a high value asset and I've made it a no value asset. Volume, I can go ahead and say there's 15 copies. I want to get down to 1, or like I said, if there's 1 million records inside this particular column, go ahead and delete it. If I found it inside of a PDF, I can go ahead and shred it. Vulnerability, I can take it from where it was at the high risk location that's sitting on your desktop, and I can go ahead and move it. So I can go ahead and relocate it. So there's a variety of cures. I can also do third-party cures for those that already have encryption tools, those that already have DLPs. There's a lot of cures that you guys already own inside your Microsoft stack that we can also automatically apply. So if you have MIP and AIP and all the cures that those apply, we can use those as well. We can also watch for data-centric events. Large number of files deleted probably tells me I've got a problem. Maybe I'm in the middle of a ransomware attack, or a large number of files encrypted also could be part of an overall ransomware attack. The first one leading to a data breach, and then they go ahead and lock it down, going right back to that Broward example I used earlier. This is what it looks like in the tool. It's not there today. This actually ships the end of July. So what we've done is taken that chart with the get the red out, and we've moved it into a visual conversation to say, all right, in this case, that large blue dot is where most of my risk is. And I can look at which one of my data assets has the most risk. So this is also get the red out. And then I can go back to the board and say, over time, look what happened in July. We had a bunch of people that were downloading a bunch of information. That was a problem, but we went ahead and applied cures to it. And now our risk has gone ahead and shrunk. So we can take a look at sensitive data and apply risk models on top of that. So not only can you visualize it, you can actually drill down to go ahead and remediate it. So an administrator doesn't just run up and say, look at our report. They can click on that blue dot, go right to the asset that it is and invoke a remediation, or they can go ahead and send it something as simple as an ITSM ticket, ServiceNow or an EasyVista or whatever you guys might have, Zendesk, and say, please go ahead and remove this. We have found this on your endpoint, and then go back and scan it 2 days later to make sure that it's gone. Next slide, Cor.
Yeah, so taking the processes you're using today and trying to identify risk, what we're really doing is we're enhancing that process overall, right? There's no one tool that does everything. It has to be a combination of security tools within a program. So again, coming back to the data-centric view of security protection and compliance, rather than protecting the edge, I think of it like edge protection. So if you look at the dots we've got there, we've got data loss prevention tools, we got antivirus tools, we have intrusion detection, we have firewalls, we have all these edge types of security tools to help protect the devices where the data is stored. If you bring Spirion into that model, now what you have done is you've dimensionalized that. You've added a third dimension that you can say, hey, this particular system has student data on it. So because we know that, you may actually decide, hey, we need to harden our firewalls for this particular system. Or better yet, we need to change the policies, the access policies to this based off of the types of data that are being stored there. Again, the data-centric process is all about saying what is actually being stored there so you can make those decisions around that zero trust model, not what you intended to store there. So you can take the different SASE platforms that you have, your CASBs, SD-WANs, next-gen firewalls, and so forth. So like your Fortinets, your Palo Altos, your Netscope, your Zscalers, all these different tools that have all these fantastic at motion processes to prevent, the data exfiltration, the data moving external from the organization appropriately, but pick up on the tags that we're applying at rest, because the at rest is where data sits most of the time, right? It's the types of data that really become what the bad actors are going for, right? So the whole idea is that we're enhancing those processes through being able to integrate through that. And by doing that, then we're able to enhance the data privacy process as well. So again, it's all about elevating your data security ecosystem. So we're looking here at a couple vendors that we have integrations with. The idea is that because we're persistently classifying files, these systems, including the others we were just talking about, can pick up on our tags, and they can better make decisions around how to manage that data in motion. We have a marketplace that extends these different platforms and add-ons for the different solutions, and we can directly integrate all of these processes in the playbooks, the decision-making process tree that Kevin was showing earlier. A great example here is your MIP AIP. So on the left-hand side, we have direct integrations as an example. So we don't encrypt, right? We focus on what we do well. That's the data discovery component, the classification, protecting things at rest. So if you have an organization that says, hey, I use MIP AIP, and what I want to do is I want to encrypt certain types of data, or I want to kick off a DLP, Spirion does the scanning, Spirion does the classification, the tagging, and then it can kick off a label within Microsoft to achieve the outcomes such as encrypting a file, or saying, hey, this file cannot leave the environment because it is not the types of information we allow to leave the email system, and so forth. So overall, Spirion has this proven process, and Kevin, jump in any point if I miss something here. But the whole idea is the maturity of the governance in your organization. So you want to first off understand what sensitive data exists with your information environment, and that starts with data discovery, right? And as that process matures and you understand the types of information you're storing, you then start to employ these visual markings, the data classification. And you can see the trend here, right? Once you've started to do that, then you can start to take action on that to reduce that threat surface. Evidence-based decision-making on saying, hey, these are the types of files we no longer need to retain because they're 20 years old. They're no longer of value, but they constitute a risk to our organization. And you can better monitor how that data is being used as well. And then from all of those processes, now you have a true, again, single lens into the sensitive data and where it exists, and you can audit that. And that audit, if you can audit information, then you can govern information appropriately. And that's what gets you to the proven success that Kevin's going to talk about here in just a second.
Yeah, so just hang on the slide for 1 second, Corey. One of the things that you're never going to hear us say is about this is hard. There is no easy button. There is no buy Spirion in a box and magically we go ahead and put the button and all this stuff is done. This is a journey. The biggest impetus that I'll put on everybody listening to the call though is get started. Pick a certain location. Say we're going to go into the administration desktops and start solving that. We're going to go into email servers. We're going to start solving it in SharePoint, and we're going to find these 3 data elements in these spots and start protecting data now, because this takes time. This is a journey. If anybody has been on an identity management type journey, you don't buy an identity management tool and you turn it on and everything's all magically fixed. It takes time to do identity. It takes time to do access. And if you think of identity as one side of a bridge and you think of access as the span, and then you think of data as the other side, getting a handle on the sensitive data is the first part of what you need to do to start securing the overall data elements. And it takes time. And what this is a matter of saying we get that and we're going to get you started. And now you can go ahead and go a couple slides ahead. We've been working with education institutions, like I said, for over 15 years. And some examples, and actually like the first one, these are actually screenshots directly from their websites. So these aren't Spirion success stories. This is how they post how to use Spirion as faculty, as a student, as staff to protect your endpoint. You can go in, it's actually got screenshots and use cases and knowledge bases, and then here's where you can go ahead and download it. But this is their step one, and I just picked the first four that I Googled up, so you can find a host of them that are out there. Boston College High School. And actually Jennifer, when she was the CIO, I would call her a visionary CIO. She gets it. She now works for Accenture, helping Accenture to get it around the world. She left there just recently. But Spirion has helped us identify our gaps, blind spots, and the behaviors of data owners. So how are the data owners actually dealing with this sensitive stuff? So they not only reduce the risk of unauthorized access, but modify user behavior, because they can go back and actually put a visual tag and say, hey, this has got really, really important stuff in it. You better treat it differently, which has helped them tremendously, both in their training as well as going back with real reporting to say, here's where we've got users that obviously aren't getting it, that we've got to have some additional security around. And those can be either application owners or actually at the endpoint. We have a tendency to talk a lot about the endpoint because people have a tendency to forget about the endpoint. If you think about the average size of a hard drive these days, you're 500 gig to a terabyte. Now think about how many of those machines you have out there in the wild, and then think about how much data piles up on them over time. So next slide, I believe, is Cal State University at Hudson. I use Cal State University, even though it's higher ed. Think of 23 campuses, 500,000 students, which starts getting to the scale of some of the larger boards in Canada. So your Ed has been a longtime customer, and actually when COVID hit, I remember calling him and saying, Ed, where do we stand in terms of what we need to do? And he said, I just left the chancellor's office. And I told him, yeah, we're going to have to make some cuts because we're going to have to hunker down. The last thing you will take out of this organization is Spirion, because it is my first line of defense. If I can make sure that the data is not there in the first place, the rest of the stuff is all important, but it's not nearly as critical as that. Gartner peer reviews, for those that follow Gartner, I pulled this slide because if you look at the right, they're all education examples. Protect yourself from storing sensitive information on your computer. Helps when you need it most. We've got, I think, 40 or 50 reviews out there. I recommend spend some time, go through them. It'll take you through the goods, the bads, and the uglies. I took some of the 4 stars. I think our lowest rating on there is a 3. And some of these go all the way back to 2014, 2015 when Gartner first started doing their peer reviews, all the way up to stuff that's as recent as a week or so ago. Next slide. Just 2 seconds on us as a company. We are headquartered in St. Pete. We've been doing this for a while. Do this at scale. 35% of the NCAA Division I schools and half the Ivy League. We were acquired by the Riverside Company in 2018. I joined shortly after. What Riverside did is basically poured a bunch of money into what was already a leading product, but to modernize it, bring it to the cloud. That's orchestration interface that I showed you before is a big part of what we've been building, as well as extending the capabilities of core discovery and classification into being able to do more things like watching that sensitive data and comply with privacy laws. And that resulted in the Sensitive Data Governance Suite in 2021, including SaaS solutions both on the privacy and security side. Every vendor has to have what I call the NASCAR slide, these little logos that we post up. If you're interested in talking to anybody at any one of these, I'm happy to go ahead and set it up. Our clients are pretty vocal with what they do, especially those that have really tapped into being able to, and I'll pick on Quest Diagnostics. They leverage Spirion simply to be able to do the discovery and classification of unstructured data so that their existing DLP tool can effectively manage the data that's rolling through it. It's a very simple use case. It's been incredibly successful for their organization, up to more complex ones like Lilly, where we're actively working with them to find confidential proprietary information strings, which is a little bit more complex. We use our sensitive data engine to do that, to help them protect their intellectual property. So some great use cases, some great clients that we've had the good fortune of serving over. Some of these are brand new and some over the last 10 years. I think that's it. As promised, so I started off this conversation saying we were going to go really fast and be respectful of your time. It's recorded so you can slow it down and play it at half speed. I know I talk pretty quick, but hopefully this gave you guys a good overview of what we do and how we look at overall security posture, especially when it comes and starts with protecting what matters most, which is the sensitive data of your students, of your faculty, of your staff, and of your communities. Your communities, you have all your vendors' information. A lot of vendors that you guys deal with are local and core to the community. And as being part, you've probably got student information from students that graduated 15, 20, 30 years ago. Corey made a comment and he said it's not valuable to you. It's incredibly valuable to those individuals and to bad actors that might want to do something with it. So thanks for listening. I'll hand it back to Mr. Malloy, and we do have a couple minutes for questions if anybody has them. Kevin, I don't want to, where do you want to take the rest of the call? So I will hand it back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Kevin and Corey. You've shared a tremendous amount of information, and it's greatly appreciated. You've got a pretty sweet tool here, and I know a lot of us have been struggling with all of the data we have and how best to classify it and then ultimately manage it for safety and privacy reasons. I'm going to kick it off and have one question, and then I'll turn it over to others. My first question is, I saw on one of the slides you're indicating a 98.5% accuracy rate in obviously investigating, discovering, and classifying. What happens to the other 1.5%?
So Corey, I'm going to let you take that from a technical standpoint because you had the good fortune of sitting at the desk for 10 years and tuning for false positives. Let me just take the 98.5 because that sounds absolutely like vendor ease. And I agreed. So when I got here, we had that on our website, and I said, I will not have anything on our website that I can't prove. So we hired the Tally group. We gave them access to the tool. We gave them a pile of sensitive data and said, come back and tell us what you can get. And they came back at like 98.4732. So we did round up a little bit, but we can send you the Tally report to tell you actually how they got those results, what they looked for, and what the pieces were. So that's available. But Corey, how do we tune out for false positives? Because it is it's a fair question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so the 1.5%, when I was sitting in the chair having to do this, was basically saying, okay, I'm getting false positives. So for example, let's talk about student IDs. Student ID can look like anything, right? So it could be a string of digits, could be alphanumeric, it could have, let's start with 3 zeros and then you've got 15 characters that come after that. So there are going to be cases where maybe you're keying off as something that you're not expecting. So the way you reinforce that model to make it more accurate is you can indicate to the engine, our discovery engine, to say, hey, look for these characters or this pattern, but also look for something that says stu ID or SID or student or something like that. So there are ways that we can reinforce the validation so that you're getting back only the information that you're interested in. And that's one of the techniques we use for that. And this is also true for anything, right? You can reinforce that not only with saying look for stu ID or student ID next to that set of digits, but also look for an address near that, or look for a date of birth near that, or something like that. Or maybe look for the file, the header of the file says transcript or so forth. So there's a lot of different ways and creative ways. As a human, when we look at a document, we understand what it is we're looking for, but that's how we do that. Fantastic question.
Okay, thanks. We've got another question here. Go ahead, Chris.
Great, thanks. I mean, this looks like a great, powerful tool. I would say, how would you address my biggest fear in terms of data? And that is teachers using non-authorized cloud-based applications as basically their personal accounts and storing student data on them, like shadow IT. How can we discover who is using shadow IT and putting sensitive data on that shadow IT? Because that's my biggest risk. It's even a bigger risk than endpoints.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Very fair question, and that is challenging. So you have your enterprise systems. So let me pick on like G Drive as an example, since that's pretty prevalent in the education space. So we have our enterprise G Drive accounts, right? And those can be targeted very specifically because we have access to those to scan those, right? Your organization manages those types of environments. And to your point, we also have our own personal G Drive accounts, right? That becomes challenging because we don't necessarily have access to scan those locations. But one thing that we have discovered as a trend is that when we do have personal accounts that we're using, there are typically what we call sync files on, let's say, the laptops, those workstations, right? So because you have sync files there, which could be personal information that includes student information, that could be part of the scope for when you're scanning laptops, right? A laptop belongs to the organization. If there's incidental use of it, it still becomes purview to the scanning, the protection of the device. So as we're scanning through that all the content on that, we would also pick up on those sync files, and that generally encapsulates that personal information or that personal repository they're using to store student ID incidentally. Really good question.
Thanks for that, Corey. Just looking around. Oh, we've got another question here. Steve, come on up.
Hi, good morning. I've got a few questions. Made the drive to London this morning, so I got up real early, so bear with me. Is this available on, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term OECM.
I see Mr. Malloy heading to the podium.
Yeah, so it's not on the OECM. As far as I'm aware, the OECM hasn't released any type of requests to the community for pricing. But I believe, based on the interest that I'm hearing today, it's a conversation that I will start up with the OECM and welcome anybody that wants to join me in approaching the OECM together. We can talk to them and find out what we can do.
Another one while you're up here. Are any Ontario boards currently using it?
I'm not aware of any, but I think Corey and Kevin can offer something towards the end.
Okay.
Hint, hint.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a couple more quick questions. Is your solution, is it cloud-based, or is there like an appliance or something that you install, within our boards?
Yeah, so our solution is cloud-based.
Cloud-based, okay.
Yes, yeah, it's cloud-based, and we also offer agents that can run locally on devices, so like your laptops, where they're typically not always connected to the network. The agent's lightweight, and it provides that additional protection. So as new data is being discovered, it can be classified. You can have policies applied to it rather wherever it is in the world, right? So local policy, and then whenever it connects to the internet, it would obviously grab the new policy or send results to the console.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Azure Cloud, and we do have instances in Canada.
Okay. And last question, this technology, like, what do you classify it as? Like, in your slide deck, you talked about a lot of things we're familiar with, like SASE and DLP. This technology, what is it classified, I guess, like within the, security industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a good longer conversation too. So Gartner has historically called this a file analysis tool. IDC would call it a DLP tool. We do what they call DLP at rest. We do not do DLP in motion, which would be your traditional semantics and your McAfee's of the world. We complement those solutions, but they do split the DLP market into at rest as well as in motion. Gartner, we actually engaged with them last year to say, define this for us, because what's happening right now is the data security, data privacy, and data governance markets are all starting to coalesce around this idea that sensitive data is the cornerstone of that. They haven't named it yet, but if you were to go to Gartner Peer Insights, we show up underneath two categories. One is file analysis, which makes perfect sense for discovery and classification. Forrester actually does have a discovery and classification now tech that they call it as a separate technology, but you'll find it underneath data security, data privacy, data governance, Gartner specifically DLP and file analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Just quickly looking online, oh, yep. So we've got a question here online here. Does Spirion sell directly or through resellers or both?
I got that one, and we sell through resellers. So the only time that we will do direct business is in the events we had some historical very large clients, large household name folks that force us to go, but we are a channel-centric company. About 95% of what we sell goes through channels.
Okay, great. And we've got another question online. How is the DLP solution compared to the one already provided by Microsoft?
I'll let Corey answer that in more detail, but we absolutely integrate with MCAS. We didn't go into that in greater detail, but we're a Microsoft Information Security Alliance partner. You can actually go to their website on that, because Microsoft recognizes what they do well. But from an enterprise standpoint, they know what they don't do well. But Corey, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, as any vendor, we're going to focus on, and Microsoft, we're all going to focus on the specific areas that we're really good at. Microsoft's really good at the information rights management side of the house, right? So the encryption, the DLP in motion types of processes. They're not so strong on the data discovery component. They typically use what's called regular expressions. So they've got about a 60%, 70% confidence of the data that they're finding. And there's some limited functionality there. For many, it works well for them. For true governance, data governance that we're talking about today, it really does take a discovery tool that can be very accurate at finding data and also be able to find very complex and different forms of data. So we basically pick up the slack there on the data discovery and the classification. So classification, you're just not going to have one type of classification per file. You're going to have a file that says this is considered restricted data. This is also considered, let's say, GDPR data, and it also belongs to finance or something like that. So we add some additional capabilities that AIP may not necessarily have, but then we play really well into the whole labeling process where we can kick off and invoke processes like encryption and so forth.
My second question is about the data classification, because dates of birth, social insurance numbers, bank account numbers, that's really easy. How do you do stuff that is more verbiage? Let's just say it's a confidential board office meeting and there are minutes that if they came out in public would be very damaging to the organization potentially, or you're interviewing a student on a bullying or harassment thing. Those kind of things in their own words, they're just words. So it's a lot harder to classify that confidential and private data compared to a bank account number. How do you do that? Do you use AI? Do you use machine learning? Because trying to put all those algorithms in there could be quite difficult. Thanks.
Yeah, so Corey, let me take the first step at it, because there are some specific vendors, and you bring up the bullying example, that do specifically that and are scanning social media sites for those types of pieces. That's not what Spirion does. However, to find specific strings, we use a thing called the sensitive data engine, which piggybacks on all the work that we have with AnyFinds, which, believe it or not, are harder to find than you might think, because you can identify a string, but saying this really is a credit card number when there could be a series of digits that look exactly like a credit card number. You've got to be able to contextually analyze where I find that string. To do non-standard strings, which we call AnyFinds, those are the standard ones out of the box, the sensitive data engine allows us to take those same algorithms, but then apply them based on what we know about that data, which is exactly the use case that Lilly uses, because they use this for proprietary information strings that might be found inside files that they don't want to exfiltrate. And it's probably more of a half an hour to 45-minute conversation on how SDE works and how it looks above and below and to the right and to the left and contextualizes what it is so it can come back with a high degree of accuracy. There's I think 202 levers we can go ahead and tune to find it. Corey, anything you want to add to that? But I think that might be a longer conversation.
Yeah, I don't think I could have done any better. Yeah, the idea is you've got your IP, and obviously IP is going to be very specific to the organization. So back to your example, like her harassment, you can say with our technology, look for the word harassment, or maybe there's a standard header or footer for that document, or maybe there's a standard version that you always use that is standardized that you always find on a document. Look for that in addition to maybe address or something like that. That's how we're specifically finding the IP that you'll be looking for. And that's true for a lot of our larger companies that are using like the intellectual property as an example, like Eli Lilly. Good question.
Thank you both for that. On behalf of all of the Southwestern staff here in Ontario, really appreciate your time, Spirion, Kevin, and Corey, for coming and, well, being online, I should say, to share this amazing tool set. We're going to close out the questions at this time. It's 5 minutes after 10, and I know we started about 5 or 6 minutes late. And just respecting everyone's busy schedules at this end, I'll just turn it over. Kevin, did you want to say a few more parting words, and then we'll close out?
Okay, again, thank you everyone for your time this morning. The tool is, I think, going to solve a lot of organizations' problems, not just in the K-12, just throughout the industry. I believe there was one report I saw that where 4% of the industries that have been surveyed have started on this journey. So, you're not alone. We're at the beginning stage with many, many others. Kevin and Corey, we spoke about something to offer the people in the group here. Is this something that you can talk about now in the closing moments?
Certainly, yeah. So we want to extend appreciation for you attending today, and what we basically had talked about, Kevin Malloy, myself, and Lisette, who's also on the call here. We'd like to offer anybody in the audience here a 1-month trial use of our desktop agent. So the desktop agent is a very powerful complement to the solution that we provide from the enterprise standpoint. The agent has a user interface, so it allows you to basically take it for a run and test it out. So you can see on the screen, you can search for a particular set of data there. Most of this is going to be out of the box type of data, so it's not connecting to the console where it provides some advanced features and functionality, but it can give you a real nice taste for how it actually works and the accuracy and the different types of processes that you could potentially use larger scale. So we do want to extend each one of you a license for this, and Kevin Malloy will kind of work through that process and get you guys set up with that. Thank you again.
Great. Well, thank you. Enjoy your day, and it's great to be back together.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And like I said, if you need more information, Kevin Malloy can absolutely set you up. Please connect with us, LinkedIn, Twitter, ton of information on Spring.com. So we appreciate your time. Have a great summer and have a great weekend.
Thank you,
Great,
everybody.
thank you all. Thank you all. Bye now.